Hi, I'm Jeff Morris. I served 8 years on active duty in the United States Air Force and 18 years in counting in the United States Air Force Reserve, so a total of 26 years and change so far.
When did you originally go into the military or join?
Sure, after I graduated from college, I was commissioned into the Air Force on about May 14th, 1993, and I was 22 years old at the time.
And you were working, and that was when you started basic training?
No, I had gone to a 4-week officer training camp during the summertime while I was in Air Force ROTC at Kansas State University. So I did that, and then after I finished at Kansas State University and graduated, they commissioned me as a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force. And then I went to training on a specialty after that.
So where did you, when you graduated and you said you started in California, so California was the training, or was that the actual, or did you start the process there?
Sure. My first job in the United States Air Force was as an intercontinental ballistic missile launch officer, so ICBMs, nuclear missiles, Minuteman IIIs. And to get training for that, I started in October of 1993 at Vandenberg Air Force Base, which is on the coast of Central California. And I was there from October until March of 1993, getting trained on how to operate them, how to launch them if I ever needed to, and then waiting for my security clearance to finish up so that when I arrived at the unit in May that I could actually start operating the intercontinental ballistic missiles. And my unit was in Grand Forks, North Dakota at Grand Forks Air Force Base. I was in the 447th Missile Squadron and 321st Missile Wing.
So what was your initial thoughts when you showed up at the first place?
It's kind of a lot to take in. I remember when I showed up at the first place at Vandenberg that they just had all of our training every day mapped out, and so I was used to college, which was maybe 3 hours a day and then your homework, and then you would show up here at 7:30 in the morning and then train until 4:30 in the evening all day long, and then maybe you would have simulator rides on the missile procedures trainer, they called it, on how to operate the missiles. And sometimes those would be in the evening or even overnight for 6 hours because they only had a couple of these and a lot of people to get through, so they would often operate them for really long periods, sometimes 24 hours a day.
Okay. Back to the military part, did you chose to go into the Air Force or this division?
Yes, I chose to go into the Air Force, and kind of as part of my choice, the Air Force paid for the last couple of years of my college, and so I was on scholarship in the Reserve Officer Training Corps.
So the rooms that you were in, can you explain them a little bit of what they were like or where they were? And
Yes. So when I was in North Dakota, my actual job as a ICBM launch officer or combat crew member involved driving out probably an hour to 2 hours away from the base in the very northern reaches of North Dakota, just maybe an hour away from Canada, and sometimes maybe only 10 miles away from Canada. And we would go downstairs, taking an elevator maybe 60 to 100 feet underground, depending on which one we were at, which missiles launch control facility that we were at, and we would go down for 24 hours. We would barricade ourselves in by shutting a multi-ton blast door behind us while we were underground, and we would be in a little tiny room that was maybe 30 feet by 20 feet inside of a concrete capsule that was buried underground. So we'd shut that door, only open it up maybe to get food in or maintenance people in. We'd be there for 24 hours until another crew of 2 people would show up to relieve us, and then we would go home after that. Have half a day off, maybe work the next day, or maybe have the next day off. Typically, you would do that eight times per month for 24 hours at a stretch.
did you ever have less than 8 times per month where you had quite a bit of free time on you?
Sure, it would depend how the schedule worked any given month. It would be a really light month if maybe you had 6 alerts is what we called them, but typically you had 7 or 8, And then sometimes if you had six, you were on the schedule as a backup in case somebody got sick or injured. And then you may have to go out or you may not have to go out. So if you had maybe 6 alerts for the month, you might have 2 backup alerts where you were on the schedule just in case they needed you if somebody else couldn't do the job.
Okay. So the 24 hours that you were down there, can you explain the type of work you did? Was it full-time on things, or did you ever have layback time where you're just kind of sitting there waiting for more information to come in?
Sure, it could be really, really super boring until it wasn't. And then all things could just sort of happen at once, and it could be really overwhelming with inputs for you to deal with, alarms going off, message traffic coming in from 2 or 3 or 4 different sources that would print things out, or phones that would ring. You would have to coordinate maintenance with all the missiles that were assigned to you. So any particular missile capsule would have 10 missiles assigned to it. Those would be in a flight of 5 missile capsules, so they would have 50. And then there were 3 in that squadron would have 5 flights, and then 3 squadrons would make up what they would call a wing. So 150 missiles total. They were doing maintenance on the missiles all the time, so they would have to go out, strike a site, open up the large cover that was there. They might replace the warheads or the guidance system, or do an upgrade, any number of things that would keep you busy all day long, talking with people, coordinating the maintenance, making sure that the missile was healthy. People could come out and do maintenance on the capsule that you were in as well, depending on what needed to be done. Sometimes it was scheduled preventative maintenance, and sometimes it was just because something broke, because the technology was really old, a lot of it from the 1960s, even though I was doing this in 94 to 97.
Okay. So while you were down there, the equipment, can you explain noises or any of the
Sure.
how they were?
So the equipment, as I said, it was pretty old, 60s era stuff, and I thought at the time it looked antiquated, and now it's 25 years later, and I can remember you could see maybe the equivalent of a hard drive was a very early thing called a plated wire memory, and it could weigh maybe 100 pounds and just have a few kilobytes of memory that it used to store targeting or guidance information for the missiles that you were connected to. And all of the equipment was in gigantic racks, each rack about 5 to 6 feet tall, weighing several hundred pounds because it was constructed out of steel that was maybe 2 inches thick with drawers that slid into it. And in the top, they had an air input and an air outlet, and so they were always forcing air in to keep this really old equipment cool. And so it was constantly in the low 60s inside the capsule. It was very dry, and there was always the sound of rushing air because it was almost like being inside of an actual air conditioner, because they blew so much air in there to keep the equipment cool. They said that if the air conditioner quit, you had about 3 minutes, I think, to shut down everything in the capsule and then get out, or it would all start to catch on fire and burn down. So it was pretty important to keep it cool. It was not for our comfort, but for the comfort of the equipment.
Did you ever see any action or anything close to what you thought might?
No, we would train on a monthly basis and sometimes more often for our go-to-war mission. And our go-to-war mission would be not just the day-to-day caretaking of the missiles, but if the president, or what they would call the National Command Authority, would decide that the United States was under attack by a foreign adversary with nuclear weapons, they could instruct us to launch our nuclear weapons. So we would practice so that we could do that very quickly and efficiently. Because really, if a rocket, like a nuclear missile, is coming from another country to the United States, if it would come from, say, Russia or China or someplace like that, you might have a half an hour after you detected it to react. But a lot of that might be eaten up in decision time, leaving very little time for the guys like me on the end of launching them to actually do it after somebody decided to launch. So in a matter of minutes or less, we would be able to go from getting a notification to being ready to launch the missiles.
So can you describe the launching process of what it would have to go through for you to initially?
Sure. So the keys to the missiles and some things called cookies or tickets that were embedded in epoxy that nobody could get into because they were tamper resistant. You could tell if somebody had tampered with them. Were kept in a little tiny lockbox or safe in the capsule, and it was locked with 2 locks. This is my lock, and then the other person that I was downstairs with underground would have a lock, each not knowing the combination of the other's lock. And then if a message came in that had to be authenticated from the President or the Secretary of Defense, you would have to open that box up, pull out the authenticators, break open the appropriate one that was mentioned in the message, open it up, and if the code inside matched what was in the message from the President or other national command authority, you knew it was authentic, and then you followed the instructions in the message, which might say to prepare to launch or get into a different posture or DEFCON defense condition, or it might say launch all your missiles or only launch a few, or retarget your missiles to a target that's emerging that we want to keep at risk.
Okay. So how much time in between them making the decision and calling you would it take before the missile would actually leave the ground?
If I twisted the keys to launch the missiles after getting the appropriate codes to enable the missiles, it might only take a few seconds for the missile to react, slide a very large blast door off the top of the missile, and that would fly a quarter to a half mile into a field next to the missile in rural North Dakota, and then the missile would light and take off, and it would be 30 minutes later that it would hit its target. Once they're launched, nobody can call them back, self-destruct them, or anything. So it's a very big deal to launch an intercontinental ballistic missile, because once you've decided to do it and you've launched it, you can't stop it after that.
Mm-hmm. How large were the missiles?
The missiles themselves were about 60 feet tall,
Okay.
and they could have between probably 1 and 3 warheads called multiple independently targeted reentry vehicles, or MIRVs, on the top. So each missile could hit between 1 and 3 targets.
How was the communication process between you and the missiles? Is it all wires? How is it hidden?
Sure. Between the missile launch control facility where I was located and the actual missiles, each one would be between maybe 5 and 10 miles away from where I was located, in kind of maybe a circle around my launch control facility, up to 10 missiles for each launch control facility, as I'd said. And so I could potentially be controlling 10 missiles times 3 would be 30 warheads. And they're connected by underground cables that were buried 6 or more feet underground between my capsule and each one of these locations. And then there was also a radio system that would let you send commands over the radio to the missiles. So you could launch them either way, either by a command sent over the cable or a command sent over the radio. To launch a missile, it took the missile being enabled with the proper codes sent from on high, and then it would take launch votes from 2 capsules. So myself underground with my partner would have to twist keys at the exact right time to send a launch vote, and then another capsule like ours somewhere further away but also connected to our missiles would also have to twist their keys simultaneously and send a launch vote. Once it had 2 launch votes, it would initiate the launch sequence, and you couldn't stop it after that.
Did you ever have what's your best memory you have during this part that you were serving?
Sure, it's a very, very remote area. Being in North Dakota, it was a small town, maybe 30,000 at the most that I lived in. There were a lot of military people there, and because nearly everybody was pretty far away from their home, and they were just starting off in the military, all second lieutenants or first lieutenants. We had similar backgrounds. We were the same age. We had all just graduated from college. So I made a lot of friends, and I'm still friends with quite a number of those people even today. So my wife jokes that I have friends in every city that we might visit all across the country. And so whenever we go somewhere, I might call somebody up and visit with them or go out and have dinner, just because I know so many people from my time up there.
On your downtime, when you weren't studying for college or when you weren't on duty or training, was there anything to do that you liked, or?
Sure, I used to play golf. I don't play golf anymore, but I had a lot of free time during the day when you're off on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. Nobody's playing golf on Tuesday or Wednesday morning or early afternoon, and so I played quite a bit of golf when I lived up there. I duck hunted. I watched a lot of movies, some TV. This is pre-internet, not completely pre-internet. It existed, but it wasn't like it is today. People had cell phones, which were pretty large and bulky at the time. So you did a lot of things with people, and that's how come I have so many friends from up there.
So you were in the missile line of duty for how long?
I did that for 4 years.
4 years, and then after that, what did you move into?
My next 4 years, I went into program management at Los Angeles Air Force Base. It's the place where the United States Air Force buys missiles, rockets to launch satellites, satellite systems, and pretty much any equipment that goes into outer space from the Air Force or the military. And all the industries are clustered around Los Angeles or that area near Los Angeles International Airport. And they have a very tiny base. It's about 1 square block called Los Angeles Air Force Base. And I went there and I spent 4 years as a program manager helping to buy various satellite communication systems and training systems that went with them. And then I had a job that sent me around to various places in the world to help install the equipment that we purchased there and set it up right after it was purchased. So some of the very first instances of that equipment I helped to go install in places like Korea, Japan, Bosnia, Germany, and some other places that I didn't get to visit but sent equipment to.
Mm-hmm. So while you were traveling around the world, essentially, setting up the satellites, did you ever have a frightening moment, or what was
about the scariest that I got was I have not been to war, I have not been in combat, but I was in Bosnia while it was still a little bit hostile after we had kind of a war there in the late 90s, 96, 97. I was there in I think 2000, and again I think maybe late 99 and 2000. So I went twice, and everything was bombed out. I was staying in a Holiday Inn that could probably hold 2,000 people because it was 12 or 15 stories tall, and it was one of the only hotels left in Sarajevo, which is in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And I could look out my window, and all the buildings around me were bombed out or rubble. And it was really weird because I was staying in this hotel that could hold all these people, and it maybe had 10 or 20 people staying in the entire hotel. So they knew exactly who you were right away every time you walked in or out. And I think I shared with you that I had a rental car there, which was really weird because even though I got it from Avis, it was like I was renting somebody's personal car to drive around, and that it had been rammed into by some sort of a British military vehicle while I was eating lunch one day on a international base in Sarajevo. And as I drove it back to the hotel with a big dent in it, I was parked there for maybe 5 minutes before the guy that owned the car showed up, very irate, and it was difficult for me to get all the police reports that I needed and satisfy him because he was actually waiting at the airport to try and keep me from leaving the country because he wanted somebody to pay for the damage to his car.
What were some medals or badges that you had earned up to this point?
Sure. Let's see. As a missile launch officer, the most interesting one that I received was something called the Combat Readiness Medal. So after you'd done that for, I think, 18 months and had passed certain milestones, they would award you a Combat Readiness Medal that said you were certified and ready to go to combat and fully qualified to launch nuclear missiles after you had achieved those milestones. And that was a little ribbon and a medal that I got. I think I also got a Humanitarian Service Medal because the city of Grand Forks, North Dakota flooded pretty bad in 1997 while I was there, and a lot of people from the military, including me, helped rescue people or build dikes out of sandbags or remove emergency equipment from the hospital to help people out while everything was flooded in the entire town.
And what was the highest rank you had earned?
So while I was on active duty, I started off as a second lieutenant.
Mhm.
I got promoted 2 years later to first lieutenant. 2 years after that to captain. And I was a captain when I left active duty and joined the Air Force Reserve. I was attending law school, still in the reserves, got promoted to major. And then after I finished law school as a major, I became a judge advocate general or a lawyer for the Air Force Reserve. And I got promoted to lieutenant colonel, and then in 2016 promoted to 06 or colonel. Some people might call it bird colonel because the rank looks like an eagle or a bird. And so I'm currently a colonel in the Air Force Reserve.
And you're still, how long have you been doing the lawyer or part of it?
I started that in late 2004 when I changed over from the regular duties that I had as a reservist at Los Angeles Air Force Base to the JAG Corps in the Air Force and became a lawyer for the Air Force. I've been doing that since about October, November of 2004 when they sent me to the JAG school until present, so quite a while.
How well did you stay in touch with your family while you were on duty, or was there any tough times there?
I would write them about things that I was doing in training that weren't classified, just things that I would experience, sites that I would see. One of the first things that I did when I arrived at my first active duty station for training was I purchased a camera with some money that I had received from graduation when I graduated from college, and I took a lot of photos. So I'd send photos back and write letters. Again, this is in the infancy of the internet. Some people had email, it did exist, but most people didn't. There weren't easily accessible email services like Hotmail or Gmail or anything like that for another 7 or 8 years after that. And so I would write letters home to my family and friends.
After your active duty, how did it, so where did you go after that, and what made you come to Aurora?
Okay, after that, I graduated from law school and I wanted to become a patent attorney. And it turns out I went to law school at University of Kansas, and I had a technical background as an undergrad in electronics engineering technology. And because of that, I could become a patent attorney. And I did. I took a test to become a patent attorney. But there weren't a lot of jobs for that in Kansas or really anywhere around Kansas. So I got my first job in San Jose, California, and I moved out there. While I was out there, I got married, and we lived there for about 2 years. And the woman that I married was from Aurora. After I'd been out there for 2 years, my bosses said, "You can telecommute if you want." And she said, "We should move to my hometown in Aurora, Nebraska." And so we did. In 2007, late 2007, we moved here, and we've lived here ever since. And this is her hometown, and I like it a lot here because it's got about 4,000 people, and I grew up in a town in Kansas that had a little less than 1,000 people, so this is like a major metropolis for me compared to where I grew up, even though it's way smaller than Los Angeles or San Jose or anything like that. It's a great place to live and to raise kids and things of that nature.
So would you call yourself a more small town person?
I'm-
How do you feel about being in big cities? And
I can live in a big city, but I don't think I would like to raise children there. And I like a lot of things that are in a big city, but my friends that still live in large cities wonder, how can you live in a small town? And I just tell them, you have to drive 45 minutes or an hour to get to anything that you want to do as you drive around in traffic in your city. In an hour, I can be in Lincoln, Nebraska, or Grand Island, or Kearney. In 2 hours, I can be in Omaha. So I can really do anything that I could in a large city, driving probably an equivalent distance, but I'm driving down the interstate at 80 miles an hour instead of in traffic at 5 or 15 miles an hour. So I like it.
so as of today, you're still part of the military, or the Air Force military part, but do you do anything else with your time, or does that take up quite a bit of your time?
That takes up probably 6 weeks a year. So about 4 weeks of that is required time that I spend with the Air Force Reserve at an active duty unit in the Air Force. Presently, I'm assigned to Air Force Space Command as the senior reserve lawyer for Air Force Space Command. I'm in charge of about 30 other lawyers distributed around the country in Air Force Space Command units. And in sort of my spare time, I probably spend another 2 weeks a year coordinating with them. So outside of those 6 weeks, I've got little kids, so I coach soccer, I coach t-ball, things like that. And then I have my regular job as a patent attorney in a law firm that I opened up a couple of years ago. So that keeps me busy.
If you could go back to, you had said that the original cell that you were in or capsule that you were in had been taken down or filled in. If you could go back, how much would you remember from working there? Like, could you still see everything and write it down close to the way you could?
I wonder if I could. Sometimes I have dreams that I'm still there doing it, because at the time they trained you so relentlessly because you had to be able to react very quickly, and the culture is essentially perfection because you're dealing with nuclear weapons, so they wanted everybody to do everything exactly right all the time, and really on a monthly basis, if you got less than 100% on any test that you took, they would put you in remedial training if you missed one question and got a 99% or a 98%. And so it was really drilled into you. They do things differently now, but if they did things the same way, I feel like I could probably go under there and just be woken up out of a cold sleep, pull my manuals open, and probably still do the same job. Although I imagine there's quite a bit of rust. With a little training, I'm sure I could pick it up again, which is kind of scary that 25 years later I could probably do a very complex task. So, yeah, I think I could still do it.
Oh, I was going to ask. I completely went blank. What, while you were in the capsule, when there was free time, what did you do on the free time while you were down under the ground?
You could walk in laps in the capsule. It was big enough that you could walk maybe 15 feet, turn 5 feet, and then do a little rectangle. Usually one person is asleep down there. If there wasn't a whole lot going on, you could read books. They had lots of magazine subscriptions. Lots of the capsules had a movie collection on VHS cassette tapes, so there was a little tiny TV about this big that you could watch movies in if you wanted to. You couldn't hear them very well because it was so loud with the air rushing through the whole capsule that you couldn't hear above either the air or the little constant beeping of the alarms that would go off. But you could do that. I got a master's degree while I was in North Dakota, so I did some of my studies while I was underground. I was, for my unit, the volunteer person who did income taxes for people, so I would study manuals on how to do income taxes so that I could help people with their taxes. So things like that in your spare time.
Do you ever wish that you would stayed into the active duty part of it longer, or how did that all play out for you?
I left active duty in 2001. My last day was April 1st, 2001. And I ended up leaving because they had given me another assignment. And when you're on active duty, if you don't have a service commitment that forces you to stay, they have this really weird thing where they'll give you 7 days to deny the assignment and then just decide to get out. A year before I had done that, I did have a 1-year commitment left to stay. So I had just said, no, I don't want to go to your next assignment. I don't like it. It seems kind of boring. And so I got out and made plans to go to law school. If I had stayed in, I wouldn't have gone to law school. I wouldn't have met my wife. I wouldn't have my 2 kids now. So yeah, it seems at times like, oh, that would have been great if I had stayed in. I would be past 20 years now. I could be completely retired. But then I wouldn't have all these other things that are in my life. So I don't regret getting out at all.
Do you ever wish that you could learn the new technology or see how updated it's been since you were in?
I might like to take a tour of it, but one of the reasons that I did get out was because the kind of career path that they were putting me on looked like it might send me back to North Dakota or Montana or Wyoming to do the missile job again. And while I'm very happy to have done that, and I absolutely would have launched those missiles if I ever had to, because that's what deterrence takes, I did not want to ever do that job again. It was pretty intense and kind of overwhelming at times. And as I said, it had a very high bar, culture of perfection, so you couldn't really screw up. And 4 years of that was really enough for me, and I didn't want to be on a career path that would take me back and make me do that for 4 more years. And so that was a large driver in me getting out.
So did you ever feel stressed during the job, and was it a pretty high stress or low, mid?
I think you put a lot of it out of your mind. It's kind of a lot to think about if you constantly kept it in your mind. It would probably drive you nuts. But thinking back on it, yeah, the stress was pretty high at the time, and the sleep was pretty low because you were on this relentless cycle of working for 24 hours and maybe on night shifts and then back on day shifts and back on night shifts. And so after a few years of that, you kind of feel like a zombie, and add all that in with the stress of always being almost perfect at your job. It's kind of a lot to deal with. It's good that I was very young at the time, because I don't think that's really kind of a middle-aged person's game or an old person's game, just because there's a lot going on and a lot to try and keep a handle on.
So when you decided on going into the military, was there another choice of direction after high school that you had thought about?
I thought at the time of maybe enlisting in the Air Force, but my dad had been enlisted in the Air Force in the early to mid-60s. He had been in Vietnam, and he suggested that if I wanted to serve in the military, I should go to college first, because he had gone into the Air Force right after college and then tried to finish college after he got out, and had spent probably 20-some years trying to graduate from college. So he was out of the Air Force for maybe 3 or 4 years before I was born, and he finished college about 6 months before I finished college at age 22. So it took him about 25 years. It was really good advice from him. I kind of joined the Air Force on a whim. The day that I went to Kansas State University to sign up for classes, they just happened to have an ROTC booth near the enrollment area. And I walked over and said, "What do I need to do if I wanted to be involved in this?" And they said, "Oh, just sign up for this class, and you can see if you like it. And then if you stick around for a few years, maybe we'll give you a scholarship and you can join the Air Force." And I said, "Oh, okay, that seems easy enough." And as a whim, I signed up for the class, and here it is, 26 years in the military and 5 years in ROTC in college. So 31 years later, I'm still in.
So when you went to college, originally you were going for
Engineering.
engineering. Okay.
Mhm. And after I'd spent 8 years in the Air Force not doing engineering, I thought it's pretty unlikely that I could go out and get a job being any kind of an engineer or in any kind of technology. I had several friends in the Air Force who had gone to law school, and that seemed like a really good thing to do if you didn't know what to do with your life. And so I went to law school. I think I started at age 30 and turned 31 shortly after I started, and I was going to law school with a lot of people that were 9-10 years younger than me. So it was kind of a surreal experience. It was almost like being 30 years old and back in high school, because they had lockers and you just went to classes and it was all in one building, completely self-contained. So it was very odd to have had all those experiences that I did, and then be back with people that were in their very early 20s, carefree and no concerns in life.
So did you finish out your engineering course in college?
I think I started as an electrical engineer, ended up graduating with an electronics engineering technology degree, which is a little lighter on the math than electrical engineering, less calculus. And the Air Force never used that. I've never used that except as a patent attorney. Helps me understand the things that the inventors have invented, because I deal with circuit, technology, electromechanical, software patents, things like that.
So if you could look back on the last 20, 25 years of doing everything, if you could change one direction you went, one thing, one job you went into, one thing you did, even as minor as where you went on a trip, could you change? What would you change if you could?
I really liked the job that I had where I was at Los Angeles Air Force Base. I traveled a lot. I think the most I traveled was 1 year, between 100 and 200 days a year. I was just hopping on planes, flying all over the place, installing equipment. I really enjoyed that because I was from a little tiny town in Kansas, and it gave me an opportunity to see the world. And when I was back home, I lived about a block from the beach in LA. really like that. If the Air Force had allowed me to keep doing that, I probably would have, and I wouldn't have gone to law school because I really liked it. But I'm not unhappy with the things that happened. I look back and I think, wow, that's pretty neat, all the stuff that happened. I'm glad that it did, but I never could have planned it out.
So you have 2 boys, you say?
Yes.
Well, when they grow up, would you ever feel happy with them wanting to join into the same type of path you went, or would you like them to follow in your footsteps?
That's totally up to them. I stayed in the Air Force long enough. I have a 9-year-old son and a 6-year-old son, and I stayed in the Air Force long enough that I thought that they would be old enough to remember me being in the Air Force, and I might be in as much as maybe 4 more years, so they'll definitely remember it. But it's totally up to them if they want to do it. If they wanted to be in the military, I would support them. I would probably tell them all the bad things about it so that they would make an informed decision. And if they didn't want to be in the military, that's totally up to them too. I would be completely fine with that, and I'm sure their mom would probably be a lot happier because you never can tell when you could be in life-threatening danger when you're in the military. It could just be part of your job, and I wouldn't wish that on them.
So to the future generations or the seniors that are graduating in now or last year or in the coming years, what's the biggest point of advice that you would give them about joining the military and the commitment part of it?
Sure. If you join the military, it's going to take you out of your comfort zone, and I wouldn't necessarily encourage people to join the military. I think I would just say to them, maybe be involved with something that's bigger than you. The military is one thing that you can be part of that's bigger than you are, and there are other things that are like that as well that you could consider doing, so that when you're young, you can be a part of something that's a little bit bigger than you are, that may take you out of a small town and expose you to some stuff in the world, and then let you see what everything else is like. And then if you decide, hey, a place like Nebraska is great or Aurora is great, you'll come back with a perspective, knowing why you like living in a little town.